Hey everyone, hope again everybody's having a good day and staying healthy. Today's video is going to be covering the cell cycle and some important vocabulary terms to help us to understand the basics of cell division, which would include mitosis and meiosis. So this video is going to do that, give us an overview of mitosis as well as those vocabulary terms. The video from the previous episode, if that's what we want to call it. That one kind of went through the different types of asexual reproduction. So remember, every one of those that we talked about, including budding and including binary fission, vegetative propagation, and regeneration, all involved making genetically identical organisms. So that was done through a process that we call mitosis. That is asexual reproduction. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start to understand a little bit more about what happens in the life of a cell, and also to understand about some terminology that's going to help us when we start talking more detail about cell division specifically. So let's start. So get out your pen and paper, if you will, and write a few of these down, or write all of this down. It's just going to be kind of a quick overview. And again, for all these notes that we're taking, I would encourage you to also take a look at the PowerPoint link that I have on the Google Classroom. Actually, I haven't decided if it's going to be Google Classroom or if it's going to be on the eBoard. Either way, you're going to have access to the actual PowerPoint we would have been doing in class. I'd also encourage you to keep up with the work that I'm assigning in the review book. That's going to help you to understand a little bit more and to just really test to make sure that you know what you are, what you're learning. So this is all on you. I mean, there's no way that I can check to see that you're doing this. I encourage you to just keep up. We will be, when we get back to class, some of this stuff will be collected, so it's important that you get it done. Anyway, so let's talk a little bit first about what we call the cell cycle. Now, the cell cycle is nothing more than just all the events that happen. So it's all the events that occur in the life of a cell. I'm going to put that word life in parentheses. In the life of a cell. So when we talk about the events, we're talking about things that cells do. So they will grow, they will synthesize, so they synthesize things like proteins. They're going to make DNA, and during DNA replication, so that a cell can divide. And then, of course, a cell is going to divide. So these are kind of the major events that happen. And we're going to go through a little bit of detail about it, not much at all. It's pretty basic stuff. But it's important that you understand a little bit about it. So the cell cycle, by definition, are the events in the life of a cell. The time frame that we're looking at is from one division, so the time when one cell divides, to the next cell division. That's how we would define it. And for a typical cell like a human skin cell, we're looking at about 30 hours of time to go through one complete cycle. So it's the time from one division to the next division. So in skin cells, it would be about 30 hours. So what is included in the cell cycle? So it includes two major events, and then some other events that happen. Actually, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that we're not going to talk about. If you ever want to do more on your own, you could certainly look up some of the other things that happens during the cell cycle. But we're going to talk about two major events. One of them is cell division. And cell division can either be by mitosis or by meiosis. So you have a cell, like a skin cell, that would undergo mitosis during the cell cycle, or you could have a reproductive cell that would undergo meiosis during the cell cycle. So it could be either either mitosis or meiosis. So that would be one major part. The second major event would be what we would call interphase. Now, it's kind of weird. When I was in school, years and years and years and years ago, when I was in high school and middle school, I remember them teaching that interphase was the resting phase. That's what they called it. Interphase was the resting phase. And it was kind of weird because when I got into higher levels of biology, I realized that was not the case. As a matter of fact, there's a lot more that goes on during interphase than what happens during cell division. During cell division, the cell is dividing. That's all it's doing. During interphase, that's when a cell is growing. So that means it's synthesizing a lot of stuff, including proteins and all the other things that a cell would make. So other types of materials that needs for survival, more cell membrane material, all that kind of stuff is being made during interphase. So proteins are synthesized. And then, of course, there's an important one that happens during interphase, and that would be when DNA replicates. Now, when we talked about DNA replication during our genetics topic, we talked about how DNA has to untwist and unzip, and hormone enzymes are responsible for that. Then the free DNA nucleotides come in and match up A with T, G with C, that whole thing. That's what we're talking about. And this happens during interphase. So the cell cycle is broken up into two parts. So if we want to take a look at a typical picture, okay, so we're going to have a cell cycle. It's going to be basically a circle. And that circle is going to have two parts. So it's going to have a piece taken out of it. This piece of the pie right here would be a small part of it. That would be what we would call cell division. So that is when mitosis or meiosis would be taking place. The rest of this over here would be called interphase. So interphase for most cells is about 85 to 90%. I'm going to round it off to about 90% of the pie, if you will. So this is about 10%. So if we talk about it in terms of time, that is a 10, by the way. 10%. If we talk about this in terms of time, I'm going to try that again. 10%. That's a little better. So if we talk about this in terms of time, if we're talking about a typical 30 hours, we're talking about maybe 2 to 3 hours for cell division. 10% of 30 is about 2.5, 3 hours. And then 90% would be about 27 hours. So 30 hours would be typical for an average human cell. So we're looking at, basic time, roughly 3 hours here. So this would be about 3 hours. And about 27 hours for everything else. And then, of course, the cell would undergo another division. That's how we define it. So when we talk about this process of cell division, there's some terms that we're going to have to become familiar with. There's some terms that we're going to have to know. So I'm going to just put this up here, cell division vocabulary. Cell division vocabulary. There it is. One of them is called chromatin. Chromatin is a fancy way to describe DNA that's in a long, thin form. So basically, this is uncoiled. It's uncoiled DNA. And think about the string analogy from our DNA unit when I talked about DNA as being just a long, thin piece of string, that would be what we would call chromatin. Okay, and there was a little song that someone years and years ago in one of my AP classes came up with. If you know Mary Had a Little Lamb, you could sing this song. And it's chromatin is long and thin, long and thin, long and thin. Chromatin is long and thin during interphase. So they came up with that little song, and if you sing it to Mary Had a Little Lamb, it fits nicely. So maybe you can try that at home. I'm not going to do that here. I wouldn't want to scare you away from the video for that. But anyway, so there's chromatin. That's one vocabulary word you're going to need to know. The long, thin form of DNA, it's uncoiled. And I should probably put in here, it's seen during interphase. That is when you have chromatin during interphase. That was part of that song. So the next one that we have to know is the cousin to chromatin, and that's what we commonly refer to chromosome. And a chromosome is nothing more than a coiled form of DNA. So again, if we go back to our string analogy that we had done in class, this is when I took the string and then kind of folded it up and rolled it up in my hand and got that little tiny structure that was all folded up. That is what we would call a chromosome. And chromosomes are seen only in a cell during cell division. So the only time you can find chromosomes officially in a cell is when a cell is dividing. Now, people say to me all the time, well, how can that be? Because cells have genetic material. That is true. Cells have genetic material all the time. But remember, during interphase, the DNA or the genetic material is in the form of chromatin. So the only time we really see a chromosome is during cell division. So just make sure you understand that difference. So when we take a look, I'm just going to draw a picture because sometimes we see single chromosomes and it's going to look like this. So it'll be kind of like a coiled up rod-like structure made of DNA. And then other times it might look like a doubled chromosome. So a doubled chromosome is the way that we oftentimes will see it. And that's going to be in the form of more of what we would call an X, like this. So it's one piece attached to another piece, like this. And what's interesting is that this piece and that piece, the two sides of the X, if you will, are genetically identical. So doubled chromosomes result from DNA replication. So after a cell replicates the DNA, you get a doubled chromosome. So that is just a little bit about that particular part of our vocabulary. The next word that we need to know is called a chromatid. A chromatid is a single piece of a doubled chromosome. A single piece of a doubled chromosome. So if we take a look at our picture of our doubled chromosome, I'm going to just draw it again here since it's on the other page. Whoops. Okay, let me do this again. I'm just going to draw it like this. Okay, so there's my doubled chromosome. This would all be filled in, if you will. It still looks sloppy. Sorry. So there's my doubled chromosome. This piece over here is one chromatid. This piece over here is one chromatid. and this piece over here is one chromatid. So it's a chromatid is defined as a single piece of a doubled chromosome. So here is the one, I'm going to put this line down the center here. So there's one chromatid, and here's the other chromatid there. These are genetically identical. If they're attached to make one doubled chromosome, each chromatid is identical to each other. Because again, it's the result of DNA replication. So that's a little bit about chromatids. The next one that you need to know that's related to this, it's a term that we call spindles. And spindles play a very important role in cell division because what they are, these are the cords, if you will, the ropes that will help the chromosomes separate during cell division. And again, it could be either mitotic cell division or meiotic cell division. So it could be mitosis or meiosis. They both require that these spindles form to help the chromosomes separate. So these specialized spindles will basically pull apart a doubled chromosome. So what basically they do is they move individual chromatids, again, a single piece of a doubled chromosome, during division. So basically what's going to happen is you have your doubled chromosome that looks like this. You have a spindle that's going to come in and attach here, and a spindle that comes in and attaches here like this. And what's going to happen is that separation is going to occur. The chromatids, each side of the doubled chromosome, will separate, and you're going to have a piece that looks like this and a piece that looks like that, and those spindles are going to be pulling them apart from each other. So they're going to be pulling this way. So it's separating the individual pieces of a doubled chromosome. And that happens during cell division. And that's what spindles are all about. The last thing that we're going to do for this particular video is we're going to take a look at the overview of mitosis. So again, this is a type of cell division. And what it does is it divides the nucleus of a cell into identical structures. So that's what mitosis does. So ultimately, it forms two cells that are genetically identical. So mitosis overview is that one cell produces two genetically identical cells. So mitosis can be used for reproduction, so to make new organisms, but only in simple organisms, like what we talked about with the amoeba or the hydra or with the yeast. Those would be examples of simple organisms that use mitosis as a means of reproduction. So these simple organisms would be what we would call most of the time unicellular organisms, although keep in mind that a hydra is not unicellular, but it is a simple organism. And so let me just put that in here. Bacteria, amoeba, so that would be examples. And then the other thing that we see about mitosis is that it's used for growth and repair. So that would be cell replacement. I'll put repair under there. in complex organisms. So you and I would use mitosis to make more skin cells if we damage our skin. If you've ever gotten a cut on your skin, you know that it replaces it with new skin over time. So that's what we would see. So basically, that's just a real brief overview of mitosis. We haven't gotten into any of the real, like I guess we'd call diagrams. I can make a quick diagram for you here. So we got our one cell. If it's got 4 chromosomes in it like this, what's going to happen is it eventually, the chromosomes will line up right down the middle like this, 3 and 4. The spindles will form. So there's my spindles. And then eventually you're going to get 2 cells that are each going to have 4 pieces of DNA that are going to be now single pieces. And they're going to be genetically identical to each other, these 2 cells. Because remember, when the spindles attach to the chromosomes, they separate the doubled chromosomes and pull them apart. So this is what we would end up seeing. So these would be 2 identical cells. Yep, and that's what it looks like. And that's what mitosis basically as an overview would look like. So one of the things I would encourage you to do at this point is use the link to the Amoeba Sisters and watch the mitosis video. It'll give you a good. It would give you a good, overview of mitosis, and also in your review book. So if you don't print it, that's fine. But in the review book, take a look at pages 63 to 66, and then do the questions that are associated with that section. So I'm going to put in here also plus questions, and I think that you'll get a good understanding. And again, if you're having any difficulty with anything, please email me, and just stay safe, and we'll talk soon.